Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mahavishavahari. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. This is Swami Abhedananada. This is Atma, who's going to be our reader. I'll just briefly mention Swami Atmatatrananda, who normally would co-chair this class, has been recuperating. He's had a bit of a bad UTI infection and he's having some difficulties swallowing and so forth. So he's under some nursing care at the moment, and we all hope he gets better. But tonight we are going to be continuing our reading of the lecture by Swami Abhedananada on Vedanta in daily life. Swami Abhedananda, as you probably remember, is one of the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who spent probably around over 20 years in the West, mostly at the Vedanta Society of New York, which is now the West Side Vedanta Society in New York. And so most of these works in his complete works were originally lectures that he gave in the West to Westerners. And you can definitely tell that he's gearing his talks to the Western audience of between 1900 and 1920. That was pretty good. So you'll find lots of references and comparisons to Christianity, which would be what most of his audience would have been familiar with. And of course, some of the information is a little dated, being 100 years old, but nevertheless, coming from a direct disciple, we find many words of inspiration. So let's go ahead with our reading. Should we start back just one paragraph? Would that be possible? Can we start back one paragraph?
Where would you like to begin?
A student of Vedanta would be where the previous paragraph begins.
There's hardly any paragraph.
Yeah, I know. One more, a couple more pages. There we go. Oops. A student of Vedanta, found that yet?
No.
One more back.
Yeah, okay.
Very good. Ready? All right.
The student of Vedanta does not require any special or separate training in ethics or religion, because the highest ideal and the practical side of ethics are included in the teachings of Vedanta. If we try to live according to the ideals of Vedanta, we cannot but be ethical. For instance, one of the injunctions of practical ethics is to be truthful. Why should we be truthful? The question has never been answered by any system of ethics so rationally as by Vedanta. Vedanta tells us that truthfulness is not a mere virtue, but the means of attaining the absolute truth. The absolute truth is revealed to those only who are absolutely truthful in thought, word, and deed. Moral weakness and selfishness lie at the bottom of falsehood, and therefore we should abandon them. We should shun the company of those who are untruthful. And although we may go through all kinds of suffering, sorrow, misery, and changes of fortune, yet we must not give up the ideal of truthfulness, and we must hold on to it until the last breath has passed out of our body, because truthfulness will lead to absolute truth. The eternal truth is never gained by falsehood, but by truth. Another ethical law, which is considered to be the highest level in all religions, is love thy neighbor as thyself. Now here I can ask the same question. Why should I love my neighbor as myself? Like Christianity, Vedanta teaches the ideal. Christianity teaches it as a dogma based upon the authority of its scriptures and does not give any reason in favor of it. But Vedanta gives the rational explanation and tells us why we should love our neighbors as ourselves. Because the true self of our neighbor is one with our true self. And that recognition of the spiritual oneness, when understood, is the meaning of love. Love means spiritual oneness, oneness of two souls, and that is true love. Where there is true love, there is the divinity, and there is the manifestation of God. And that divine love reigns in the heart and soul of a student of Vedanta, and therefore he loves all humanity. When the same love, which we call human love, is not backed by selfishness, it becomes divine love, and that divine love is the means by which we can realize God. God can be realized through divine love. Therefore, we should practice in our daily lives that unselfish love, which at the highest, and never encourage or practice that which is not love, and which means something different, is based upon selfishness, produces attachment, and brings bondage in the end. Neither should we practice nor indulge in it. Otherwise, we shall be the sufferers. And the ideal of love, which is divine, will not be attained by us.
Yes, wonderful words. And love is one of those key words that we find in Vedanta. We find that love is the practical manifestation of oneness. We talk about everything emerging from Brahman, but Brahman is the infinite, undivided, unchanging, which means it has to be oneness. If it's undivided, it's one without a second, as the Advaitas will emphasize. And how does that manifest? Well, in our practical application as human beings, that represents trying to cultivate that feeling of love for all beings. And of course, Swami Abhedananada is one of the exemplars of that. He really practices that attempt to love all beings and see the divine in all beings, as we all do. But he seemed to manifest it. He manifests it in ways that some of us only can strive to. But divine love is also cultivating a love for God, and we have to try to cultivate a love towards some divine personality, and in that way cultivate a connection with the absolute reality of Brahman. So this idea of love is that connection, that oneness. It's the undividedness that we're striving for. In fact, because our true nature really is infinite, undivided, and unchanging, because we are that undividedness, that's why we yearn for love. We want to love people, and we want other people to love us. That's because our true nature really is undivided. So let's go on with our reading.
The highest aspiration of the individual soul is fulfilled when it realizes its spiritual oneness with the divine being, and that spiritual oneness is the central idea and ideal of Vedanta. Vedanta teaches that there is one existence, one reality, one truth, one God, one life, and one spirit. All these differentiations and distinctions which we perceive with our senses are fictitious and unreal. They are all on the surface. Go below the surface, and there you will find the undercurrent of one spirit. And when that one spirit is properly realized, we understand that we are inseparable parts of that one stupendous whole. We must love. We cannot help loving, and through that divine love, we realize the highest ideal of our lives. A student of Vedanta who recognizes that spiritual oneness sees that one universal spirit is manifesting through all living creatures and all human beings, and therefore he loves all human beings. Also, he loves animals. The most practical result of this love, or the recognition of oneness, is that a student of Vedanta never injures or kills any living creature, because he knows that there is one life, and the difference between an animal and a human being is only in degree, but not in quality. The same life force is expressed in so many ways. Wherever the humanitarian ideas of Vedanta are preached, there prevails compassion for everybody. Their private compassion for poor animals.
There prevails, I think it says.
Oh, sorry. There prevails compassion for poor animals. Their hospitals are built not only for men, women, and children, but also for lower animals. And there is to be found the desire to take care of the poor, suffering brothers. Therefore, a student of Vedanta does not unnecessarily kill any animal for food, because he says, when I cannot give life to any living creature, what right have I to take it? Let it stay on and live. It has no purpose to fulfill. I must not interfere. And having this ideal in his mind, he does good to all, and would rather give his own life than take the life of others. Such a soul is a great blessing to humanity, as also to all living creatures. The practice of this ideal will bring the most wonderful results, which are morally and spiritually perfect. Therefore, we should teach our children to love all creatures, for even the lower animals possess life and feelings. From our childhood, we have been taught that lower animals have been created for our food. Now we must change that idea and teach our children that the lower animals are also fulfilling certain principles of life and are on certain grades of evolution. And in course of time, they will rise to the plane of human beings and will reach perfection. Therefore, we must be kind to them. Thus, in practical life, we should learn compassion. And that compassion, when properly carried out, will lead to divine love and realization of the Supreme. The teachings of Vedanta drive away the fear of death, because they say that death cannot attack our souls. The teachings of Vedanta say that we are immortal by our birthright. We are children of that universal spirit, and therefore we are beyond death. Fear of death will never trouble the mind of a student of Vedanta. As we throw away our old, worn-out garment, so the soul throws away the garment of the old body at the time of death and manufactures a new one according to its thoughts and deeds. What a great consolation is this, that we are no longer dependent upon the freak of an anthropomorphic God, and we have not been created out of nothing by the sudden whim of a creator, but our souls existed in the past and shall exist after death. Our pleasures and pains are the results of our own actions, and we are responsible for our future happiness and misery. We're not going to eternal perdition, nor are we born in sin and iniquity. Thus, the teachings of Vedanta take away all fear of death and make us happy and contented in our earthly career. What could be more beneficial to us in practical life?
I remember years ago when we were doing readings from, I think it was probably Vivekananda's complete works at that time. We had a devotee that would come very regularly, and her brother was dying, and she was a bit upset about it. And one time he said to her, "I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die." And she took it like he was saying that he was, going to recover from his illness, and that he refused to die. And I said, well, I think it's because as he comes closer to death, he realizes he's not this body, and he's not going to die. His real self isn't going to die. And that thought hadn't occurred to her. And she was quite relieved and felt very consoled to think of it that way, that his proclamation that he wasn't going to die was that he had realized that he wasn't the body, that there was something else that was him that was going to survive. So, definitely this idea of what survives beyond death is a central question for religions, and it's what really is a motivating factor for human beings to have developed religious beliefs in the first place. When you look at the history of religions, a lot of them started with this mystery of, well, there are several mysteries. One is what's controlling the universe? How can we get a hold of the weather, and how can we understand what's happening in nature and what's happening to our ancestors as they pass on? Where did they go? And so ancestor worship, or the mystery of what's happened to people after death, is what has really motivated religion. And it's interesting when you look at what's in the West, what happened to religion about, say, at the end of the 1800s, when evolution had suddenly sort of become a popular topic of discussion. Geology discoveries had discovered things that just didn't jive with a literal interpretation of the Bible. People were really looking for something that wasn't dependent on just what was written in an ancient scripture, because as he says here, oftentimes, and especially in his day when he was talking, people were taking a literal view of the Bible, and they were basing their faith on what was said there. And that was becoming increasingly difficult in the face of scientific breakthroughs. And so you can see a rise in the interest in spiritualism. People would go to seances and inquire with mediums and so forth. In some of his other works, you'll find references to that kind of thing, because this was very popular in those days, because people were looking for some sort of assurance that there was something beyond this material existence, that there was something that existed beyond death. And so there was a great interest in that kind of thing. But in Vedanta, of course, we can find methods of identifying ourselves with our true self and knowing that we are not the body and not the mind, but that we are the spirit. So let's continue with another great help. Can't get enough help. Let's get another one.
Another great help in practical life, which we get from Vedanta, is the knowledge of the divine being. The divine being is not far from us. He is the soul of our souls. He is ever dwelling within us. He's both personal and impersonal and beyond both. He can be worshipped under any name, in any form, by anyone, under any sect, creed, or denomination. He is one and eternal. When we understand this, all religious animosities, quarrels, and fights cease forever. Then we consider all sectarians as our brothers and sisters. We embrace them as children of one God. What could be more practical than this? Can a sectarian do so? Can an Orthodox Christian embrace a Mohammedan or a Buddhist? Very few possess so broad and liberal a mind as to embrace another man belonging to another religion. But Christ himself would have embraced a Mohammedan or Buddhist or any heathen as the child of the divinity. We should follow that example. We should try to live up to it, and then in our daily lives, we shall be able to understand that secret by which we shall attain to the highest wisdom of spiritual oneness that will make us free. This is the meaning of salvation, which is emancipation from bondage of ignorance and selfishness. According to Vedanta, salvation does not begin in the grave, but it begins right here and now. Vedanta shows us the way to attain to that salvation or perfection in this life. And when that knowledge of divine wisdom comes, all darkness of ignorance is dispelled, and divine powers begin to flow through our souls. Then we rise above the animal and material plane and shine with the spiritual light of the eternal sun. Now we can see how all these teachings of different branches of Vedanta fit into different departments of our lives, and how practical Vedanta is. Not only this, but there is also another thing which we should not forget, that Vedanta includes the truths that have been discovered by different branches of science. And it shows how these truths can be applied to our daily lives and how we can mold our daily lives according to these ideals and direct our efforts towards the highest goal, which is one. No other religion has done that. No other religion has ever been able to harmonize itself with different branches of science or with different philosophies of the world. But Vedanta includes all sciences, all philosophies, and all religions, and therefore it is universal. A student of Vedanta can be a Christian, a Mohammedan, a Buddhist, or a heathen, or an agnostic. Distinctions of caste, creed, and nationality are never recognized in the light of Vedanta. Wherever the truths of Vedanta are preached, there prevail peace, tranquility, self-control, and spiritual illumination. If we understand the teachings of Vedanta and live up to the ideals, then we shall be able to say, as Schopenhauer said, Vedanta has been the solace of my life, and it will be the solace of my death. And the pages run out.
Yeah, that's the end of that chapter. You know, it occurred to me there are a couple other things we can say about this oneness, and that again, it's the ideal, and people that experience that state of oneness, and we get these examples from all the great ones like Holy Mother, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and the rest, and Brahmananda. They knew that oneness of all beings, but they also had to be able to operate in the real world. So Brahmananda would say that, you know, when I'm in an exalted state, I see all of you as divine manifestations, but I have to bring my mind down so that I can teach you and I can see the faults that you're making and the difficulties you're having and relate to you in a more normal way. And again, Holy Mother had to be very practical in all her dealings with so many people. She had many difficult relatives and many devotees that she had to talk with. So all these people could operate in different levels. I remember another spiritual teacher saying, don't try to balance your checkbook when your consciousness is in your seventh chakra. You have to bring the mind down occasionally. Not that we're all sitting in our seventh chakras all the time, but anyway, you get the point. Is that there's a certain level of awareness that we have to maintain in order to exist in the normal plane. Those that and we're probably well aware of the idea that if you stay in nirvikalpa samadhi too long, the body drops off. It simply doesn't exist. It can't exist in that state. You have to have some sort of body consciousness. And so even an avatar has to take on body consciousness of a certain level in order for us to have an exemplar of how to live in this world. So oneness, you have to be careful not to think that you have to be in this blissful state of oneness and everything is divine and everything is beautiful. Yes, that's the background, but you also have to be practical. So, I mean, I know as a teacher too, I used to be a school teacher, and you have to be able to correct people's papers and tell them where they've gone wrong. You can't pretend that they're perfect in their math and their chemistry and their history and so forth. They still have faults on this level. And so these ideas of oneness are the ideal, and it's the background. And you help them because you know that they're divine. The reason you help people and the reason you work with people is because in the background you know that they are one with you, that they are divine beings, and that they have the potential for realizing that. And so you are serving God by serving them. So this is the idea that we have to have. So we have to be careful not to get too overboard in certain ways. You have to have a certain practicality. And we get that when we read the lives of Vivekananda and Holy Mother and Ramakrishna and Swami Brahmananda. So we're very lucky that we have those resources available to us in a much more recent form, that we can read the lives of these great saints that had these ideals of oneness firmly rooted in their consciousness, and yet were able to deal with life in a very practical way. Well, Am has run out of material in his Kindle, so I'm going to continue reading because this is a bit smaller print and a little bit difficult to see, and I didn't get it transferred over to his Kindle. So this one is called, the next lecture is called The Ethics of Vedanta. The Ethics of Vedanta runs in harmony with the teachings of Buddha, Jesus the Christ, Mohammed, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Sri Ramakrishna, and other saviors, as well as great moral and spiritual leaders of mankind. They are not based upon any particular book or upon the authority of any particular personage, but are based upon the eternal laws that govern our moral and spiritual life. They are not founded upon any narrow doctrine, which makes us more selfish at the expense of others, but upon the solid rock of what leads toward absolute unselfishness. From prehistoric times, the great seers of truth in India have tried their best to understand those ethical laws, observed them in their daily lives, and made the minds of their fellow beings understand those laws and practice them. They explained those laws in the most rational way. Of course, some have preached those laws and their interpretations as the commandments of God. Those who believe in a personal God as the creator and ruler of the universe gave those ethical laws in the terms of God's commands. Jesus the Christ, Moses, and Muhammad believed in a personal God, and so they explained those ethical laws as the commandments of God. But there is a danger in believing them to be the commandments of God, because if you have the conception of a personal God as the ruler of the universe and giver of certain laws, anyone who would violate those laws will be punished by him, with a capital H. That idea naturally comes out, and that is the beginning of the conception of punishment. Those who obey the commandments of God will go to him and will receive his grace, but those who disobey his commandments will be punished and thrown into eternal fire. This idea prevails in all the dualistic religions of Semitic origin, as also in the dualistic religion of ancient Persia, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They believe in the existence of a personal God, the creator of all good. They also believe in the existence of the creator of evil as distinct and separate from the creator of all good. They say that those who are overpowered and tempted by the creator of evil will suffer punishment in the end. Some of these dualists believe that punishment will continue forever, and there is no end to that punishment. But it can be asked as to why should God punish his own creatures for the faults for which they themselves are not responsible? Why should God be partial and unjust? The ideal of justice which we have is, of course, very limited. But when that ideal of justice is mixed with the ideal of all loving and all mercifulness, we find that it is very difficult to reconcile those ideals. If God loves his creatures equally, then he ought not to punish anyone. That idea is very strong among the Hindus in India, and therefore they do not believe in the doctrines of hellfire and eternal punishment, though these ideas are found in the epics and other scriptures. This is always an interesting question that comes up when we're talking to world religions classes and things like that. They want to know about the idea of good and evil and where did evil come from and so forth. And I think Vedanta does have the clearest answer. But all of these, you see, are just approximations trying to explain something which is basically an apparition. I mean, Maya creates an apparitional universe. It's like a dream world, and we know that our dreams are not always completely logical. we can't really come up with rules or logic that explains why dreams go the way they do. This world is fortunately a little bit more logical than most of our dreams, but we still have trouble pinning down all the details. But the best idea is that with the idea that Brahman is this undivided oneness that from which everything springs, how do you get from oneness into what we see? Well, you have to do it by creating dualities, pairs of opposites. It's like having a flat, placid lake or body of water. How do you get a differentiation in the body of water? Well, you create waves, you create vibrations, and the waves go up and down. You can't have a wave that just goes up. What goes up must come down is not exactly what that phrase refers to, but that's the idea. If you bring the wave up in one place, it has to go down someplace else. In order to understand what good is, you have to have a contrary idea of what bad is. And so it's a relative good and bad. And we have a whole lot of pairs of dualities that we live with in this universe. And I always like to say that the original duality that springs forth from the oneness is the idea of a subject and an object. You can't observe something unless you think you're the subject and everything else is an object. When you're in the state of oneness of Brahman, you are absolute consciousness. You're not observing with a consciousness, you are consciousness. And that's why when someone experiences samadhi, they can't describe it to you. Because they're no longer a witness of something. They are that. They are that consciousness. and there's nothing to be said. As Sri Ramakrishna says, when you're in that state, all the questions disappear. When you come back down, then you can't put the answer into words because it's not describable anymore. Words are inadequate. The words simply don't manage it. So that's our first difficulty, is that in the state of oneness, there's no observer, there's no observed, there's only oneness, there's only consciousness. In the state of Maya, we have mistakenly identified that we're a subject, we're an observer, and there's everything else out there to be observed. And so then we have to try to explain it. And that's what all of our religions are trying to do. They're trying to explain this fix that we found ourselves in, which is basically an illusory fix. It's an apparitional world. And Swami Ashokananda famously said, the most you can say about an unreal world is that it's unreal. But we go on and blab, and we write all these scriptures and all these books about how we got into this fix and what to do about it. That's the way our minds work. We have to do something. So this is our difficulty. We find that and so when we're trying to talk about ethics and justice, we find ourselves in that same fix. We do the best we can. And as anybody knows, to be completely just seems almost impossible. Maybe it is impossible. We create laws, and somehow the laws always manage to miss somehow. And people that really don't deserve to be punished end up getting punished. People that really don't deserve to go free end up going free. And so then we tweak the laws, we rewrite new laws, we throw out the old laws, we come up with a different system of government, we try this way and we try that way, and it seems to be a little better, and then new problems crop up, and we find that it's not quite as good as we thought it was, we've still got problems. And so we throw out this political party and we bring in another political party, and then that one seems better for a while, and then new problems arise, and the same thing goes on and on and on. So this is our dilemma. We do the best we can with the dealing with this illusory world of Maya, but it's never going to be perfect. Sorry I didn't get more reading for you, Atma, but we'll make it up next time. We thought we had a whole bunch of pages, but we forgot we were counting Kindle pages, which are more numerous than the pages in the book. So we thought we had plenty of reading, and then we discovered that we actually ran quite short. All right, so continuing the ethics of Vedanta, then how do the Hindus explain the evil that exists in this world? They explain it by the law of cause and effect, or action and reactions, that the law is called the law of karma. God never rewards the virtuous nor punishes the wicked, but we reward ourselves and punish ourselves by our own good and bad thoughts and deeds. The good thoughts bring good reaction in the form of results, and the evil thoughts and evil deeds bring evil reactions in the form of punishment. Suffering, misery, sorrow, diseases, or death. That eternal law is the basis of all ethics, the law of karma. And here we find the rational foundation of reward and punishment. But if we take the commandments of God as revealed to Moses or other great prophets, direct from the heaven, then we are to encounter a great many difficulties. The Christian theologians have been trying for 2,000 years to reconcile those difficulties and to explain them, but they have failed. They have not succeeded in discovering a rational foundation which makes God impartial and all-loving and all-merciful. Then again, if we study the religion of Buddhism, we find the same ethical laws and ethical teachings, but they are not explained as the commandments of God, because Buddha himself did not believe in a personal God who dwells outside nature and the universe. It's interesting, the style of English, I have to keep correcting it. They put the in front of words we wouldn't put the in, and they leave it out in other places. So he's got the nature and universe. So anyway, so if I stumble a bit, that's why. It was just the style of the way the English was for him. His religion is extremely ethical. His religion is a religion of humanity and for humanity. It is a religion which upholds the highest ideals of ethics and spirituality in the world. Ethics must be the foundation of religion. Perfect morality and highest standard of ethics must be at the root of a true religion. A religion without ethics as its foundation is of no use, and therefore Vedanta says that ethics are the gateway to spirituality, the gates which lead to the attainment of divinity, and therefore the ethical life must be the starting point of spiritual life. Some people think that ethical life is the end of spirituality, or the highest end, and they also believe that there is no end higher than that, but they are mistaken. Ethical life is the beginning of man's spiritual venture, and the end is the attainment of divinity. And it is for this reason Vedanta upholds the universal ethical laws and builds the universal religion on their basis. Whether these laws are the commandments of God or not, Vedanta does not discuss. It leaves the problem to the dualistic religionists to discuss, but it takes in the ethical laws and enables us to see the light behind them. Now, you know, we also have another issue of time and place, and we find that many cultures and civilizations have developed systems of ethics and laws and guidelines of morality and so forth that were really designed to run a society. I mean, they were based on what's the best thing for our little band of people to survive in the world. What can we do in order to make the best of our situation, to be integrated into our local environment, to get along with the resources that we have, to protect ourselves from outside enemies, all of these various things, to try to protect ourselves from diseases that we have absolutely no handle on what's causing them. Okay, that's long before any germ and virus theories and any knowledge of that kind of thing. And so you get in these more ancient laws, and this is very typical of Hinduism too, if you read the laws of Manu and so forth. They're dealing with a system that had a caste system to it. It had a whole idea of why there was a caste system, and it was actually not a repressive system in the beginning, but as the ages went on, and as again mentioned earlier, we tend to create laws and we find they don't work terribly well, so then we create new laws and and get more restrictive and more confining and so forth, and get ourselves into greater difficulties. So anyway, if you've ever read the laws of Manu, the Manu Smriti and so forth, some of them are very outdated. They're obviously designed for a society that was rural, agrarian, had no scientific basis for diseases, and was trying to create a harmonious society where people could all get along. But they ended up being rather restrictive and judgmental, really, in ways that just simply didn't need to be that way. For example, they had all sorts of rules about bodily fluids and that sort of thing, because they associated bodily fluids with diseases. They figured that much out, that if you sneezed and coughed at somebody, or if you were in contact with human excrement and that sort of thing, that you were more likely to catch a disease than otherwise. And so they had all sorts of rules and regulations about that sort of thing. But now with modern hygiene and so forth, those things are really pretty much outdated. So anyway, some of those things are really, you just have to read them with a historical anthropological mind when you're looking at it, and realize that they were written for another time and another place, and a lot of them just aren't relevant today. All right, so I probably lost my place at this point. I think it was I here. Then how do the Hindus explain the evil that exists in the world? No, I read that. Here we are. The eternal ethical law is the law of mercy. Mercy for all living creatures. Hatred is never conquered by hatred, but by love. This is an everlasting ethical law. If you wish to conquer hatred, do not hate the person who hates you, but love that person instead. This is one of the laws. Wrath is never stilled by wrath, but by reconciliation. This is another law. Subdue hatred by love. Avaricious by generosity, evil by good, and falsehood by truth. This is an everlasting law. Conquer all evil, like envy, jealousy, hatred, malice. Subdue your passions and control yourself. This is the path to perfection. Anyone who wishes to attain to perfection must have to practice these principles because in the character of all those great beings recognized as our ideals, great leaders of mankind and the saviors of the world, these ethical principles are exhibited in a most prominent manner. The cardinal virtues are purity, charity, compassion, forgiveness, disinterested love for others, and self-control. When we practice these virtues and live up to them, we become ethical and we enter the gate of spirituality, which is the gate of divine perfection. And I believe that the Sunday lecture topic is unselfishness, as I remember. Is it Abhedananada? I can't remember, but I think the topic is unselfishness. So that's one of our great ideals. And so that would be a good one. And this idea that he's expressed here really is very difficult for us to follow, and yet that's very important for us. I'm sure we've all discovered that if we've experienced hatred from somebody else or what we feel is injustice, we tend to react. We tend to push back and argue and get mad and so forth. And that frequently just amps up the the argument. It doesn't really cool things down. So, and it's very difficult for us to, I mean, it's such an automatic reaction. And so just give yourself a little time to cool down and try not to respond that way. So and sometimes you feel like there's no other way because the person just doesn't seem to listen. They don't, and occasionally you do run into situations like that where somebody simply doesn't respond to anything else. So you have to be a bit tough. So that's another issue. But in general, we find that if you can return the opposite of what you've received, you'll have better luck. So at some point down the line, maybe you've had to be tough in the beginning and express your feelings in no uncertain terms. But as soon as you can let that go and just respond in a different way, you'll be surprised at how it can turn the situation around. I remember I've seen some devotees that are really very good at that. They can get into a knockdown, drag-out argument with somebody, and you know they had tongues that could really lash it out. You see them the next day, and it's like nothing happened. They're just like right back to being a normal person that interacts with you in a nice, wholesome way, and the whole thing is forgotten. And so by simply not digging into the negativity and creating a Hatfield-McCoy situation where the hatred of the families goes on for generations after generations, they just forget it and it's gone, and they've just so that's another way to do it. If you can't just return it with love, just let it go and forget it and just go back to assuming it never happened. So that's another way to handle it. So it's interesting. We have all these ways, and I'm sure there's lots of practical advice that people can get these days from psychologists and so forth as to how to handle difficult situations. It's something that we all face. We all feel envious and jealous at times, and we get to the point where we just have a lot of trouble dealing with certain people. Very, very difficult for all of us. It's not something that any of us have conquered to an extreme extent. And you see this even, like, say, in Holy Mother. She was so kind and so gentle to people, but there were a couple of times when there was somebody that was just so outrageous that she had to manifest her terrifying Divine Mother form. and then of course the next minute she'd be back to her normal self. But she had to sort of scare the person out of their difficult manifestation of hatred or anger or whatever it was they were manifesting at the time. But then you also see that she was able to turn that off instantly, so not hang on to it. This wasn't something that lasted, and that's the key. We don't want to, because that just hurts ourselves. We find ourselves, and I've caught myself doing this myself. It's very difficult not to. You get into this situation where you just keep going over and over and over the hurt that somebody hurled at you, and who are you hurting? You're just talking to yourself. It's your own mind, and eventually you have to say, why am I doing this? Why do I keep going over this? Maybe it would be better just to drop it. And sometimes humor will help. If I get in a really negative space, sometimes just watching a silly comedy will help get my mind in a different place. And there's that famous incident, which I think I referred to before in this class, of the negotiations in the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the negotiations were getting nowhere. Both sides were digging in, and they were getting more and more antagonistic. And one of the mediators said, let's tell some jokes. And so the winning joke was told by the Cubans. He said, I'm probably going to forget the punchline here. In your system, your institutions have people that take advantage of other people. In our system, it's the other way around. It was something like that. It was like they could see that both systems had faults. Both the communist system and the capitalist system had faults where one group of people was taking some advantage of another group of people. And the way they told it was very funny. I wish I could remember the exact words. But and that loosened the whole thing up. So sometimes humor can be a great healing force, and rather than just feeling like you've been hurt and you're hated and you've got difficulties and life is tough, and which it is. I mean, all these things are in there. Sometimes just getting into a more humorous mood can really help the situation. All right, well, we're out of time, so we will close with our peace chant and meet you next week, same time, same place. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. from Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Peace, peace, peace.